I'm Vivian Brown. Welcome to Raging Waters. In this Weather Extra, we explore one of the most deadly, disastrous, and costly weather-induced phenomenons, flooding. We begin with an overview of the different types of floods and why they occur. When we look back on our climatological history, it's impossible to find a time when disastrous floods did not exist. Every now and then, the beneficial rains on which we rely turn suddenly into relentless torrents, sweeping away everything in their path. As natural and inevitable as the sunset on the Mississippi, flooding will always be a part of the human experience. Past cultures used myths and legends as a way of understanding the physical world, a way of explaining why natural catastrophes like floods happened. These legends were especially evident among the Native Americans, who had a profound relationship with their environment. Today, we take a more scientific approach to understanding our environment. We know that flash flooding is caused by intense rainfall on the same location over a period of time. It's the #1 weather killer in the U.S. In January of '95, flash flooding took many Southern Californians by surprise. A rescue helicopter plucked this homeless man from certain disaster in Malibu, but not everyone who encounters flash flooding is this lucky. River flooding can be a seasonal event, often coming about at times of snow or ice melt. It can also be triggered by excessive spring rains, or like the Mississippi River flood of '93, by a persistent weather pattern. This single event resulted in over $15 billion of damage. Homes along our shores are vulnerable to coastal flooding. Usually brought on by strong offshore storms like nor'easters, coastal flooding occurs when wind beats water against the shore. Each year, flooding takes a tremendous toll on this country. Tremendous in terms of loss of property and life. Some of the deadliest floods in history have been flash floods. In fact, flash flooding still holds the title as the #1 weather-related killer in the U.S. today. They're often fast and furious. Waters begin to rage within hours, even minutes of excessive rainfall. The force of a flash flood can demolish anything in its path, even rearrange a landscape. Flash flooding can be produced by various meteorological conditions. The Big Thompson Canyon flood of 1976 is a classic example of a flash flood caused by slow-moving thunderstorms. Saturday, July 31st, the canyon was packed with nearly 3,500 people, most there to celebrate Colorado's 100 years of statehood. Early that evening, dark storm clouds built over the Rockies. Many thunderstorms born over these mountains move eastward. However, this storm system stayed in place. It unleashed more than 12 inches of rain in 4.5 hours. The steep slopes absorbed little of the rain. A 19-foot wall of water tore through the canyon's east end, carrying with it parts of cars, buildings, and other debris.
The lights were still on them. There was people in them, and you couldn't even get close to this because of all the debris coming down.
There's no way to help any of them.
No way. No way. And you couldn't even hear them scream, thank God, because the roar was so bad.
In the thundering deluge, 139 people died. Some drowned, but most were battered by boulders and debris. The Big Thompson Canyon flood prompted changes in flood warnings and preparedness nationwide. It also led to new research in flash flood forecasting. Meteorologists have learned that many flash floods occur when a series of thunderstorms moves repeatedly over the same area, saturating the ground. It's a pattern commonly referred to as training, with a signature on radar called train echoes. When training occurs in urban areas, flooded streets often become swift-moving rivers, and drainage systems become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of water. The results are often deceiving. Sadly, many people die while trying to drive their cars through the high waters. Others barely escape. Rivers can be one of man's best resources by serving as water highways, but they can also be a big enemy because of flooding. Flooding along rivers is natural and inevitable, But when floods occur, homes, businesses, and lives are often destroyed. In late 1926, torrential rains fell on the central U.S., raising the mighty Mississippi to its highest levels. By spring of 27, more than 26,000 square miles of land in 7 states were flooded. In some places, the river ran 80 miles wide. As a result, 250 people died. In 1993, the Mississippi was at it again. The Great Midwest Flood was the worst natural disaster of the year. It swept away homes, swallowed small river towns, and left 54,000 homeless. 48 people died. Torrential rains from tropical systems can also push rivers over the edge. On the morning of July 3, 1994, Tropical Storm Alberto made landfall near Destin, Florida. The storm later stalled over central Georgia. After 86 hours of rain, widespread flooding began. The Flint River at Albany was already 20 feet over flood stage and had currents of 55 miles an hour. 31 people died, and damage estimates reached $1 billion. In June of '72, remnants of Hurricane Agnes brought devastation to parts of the Northeast. It parked over Pennsylvania. At the same time, a non-tropical system came along and captured it. Massive flooding occurred along the Susquehanna River.
Severe local flooding is occurring in the Harrisburg area. Heavy rain is continuing and near-disaster conditions are developing locally.
The flood waters rose quickly. Evacuations began at Wilkes-Barre, Plymouth, and Victoria.
Don't panic, but please, leave now.
Everybody up! Everybody out!
Homes were submerged and people were rescued. Once the waters finally receded, mud was everywhere and fish lay in the streets. In all, 122 people died and damage totaled $3.5 billion. It's a fact that rivers can be deadly and devastating, but they also remain vital to our society's livelihood. Powerful hurricanes and nor'easters often threaten our coastal communities. Residents fear the strong winds associated with these storms. However, it's the storm surge that takes a greater toll. This is what we associate with hurricanes: high winds, which can cause tremendous destruction. But wind isn't the deadliest force of a hurricane. This is the storm surge, a rapid rise in tide which creates an unbelievable force. It is caused by the concentration of intense winds around the eye of a hurricane. The highest storm surge recorded in the U.S. was caused by Hurricane Camille on August 17, 1969 in Pass Christian, Mississippi. This is what Pass Christian, Mississippi looks like today. It is almost impossible to believe that this area was covered by over 24 feet of water during Camille. For some survivors of that Category 5 hurricane, the memory of Camille will last a lifetime.
As I was looking back where the building was, you could see the apartment where the hurricane party was going on. They had the hurricane lamps, and all of a sudden, the building just started coming down till it came underneath the water, and I knew everybody had drowned in it.
Mary Ann Gerlach was swept 12 miles by Camille. She wound up in a swamp. Others weren't so lucky. Nearly 150 people were killed by the storm surge from Camille's rage. Another type of coastal storm that causes significant damage along the east coast of North America is the nor'easter. Nor'easters' winds are typically not as concentrated as those of hurricanes. They blow across greater distances for longer periods of time. One of the most classic nor'easters in U.S. history peaked on March 7, 1962, the Ash Wednesday storm. It produced over $300 million of damage along the Atlantic coast. Despite the threat of flooding brought by hurricanes and nor'easters, we continue to migrate to the coast. And as long as we do, we will be threatened by the sea's raging waters. Coastlines offer the beauty of the ocean. Riverbeds provide rich soil and transportation. But there will always be the risk of flooding for people who choose to live in flood-prone locations. Many Americans continue to ask, is it worth it? The massive Mississippi River flood of 1993 served as a wake-up call, not only for those living along the banks, but to all Americans. Monetary losses were astronomical. Damage totaled over $15 billion. Since the summer of '93, the United States has incurred 7 weather-related disasters in which damage has totaled over $1 billion. 5 of those 7 were floods. In the past, people built along rivers and coastlines for the advantages water provided. Floods taught man about the disadvantages. The 1927 Mississippi River flood was a turning point for the nation in terms of flood control. As a result, Congress adopted the Flood Control Act of 1928, which led to today's elaborate system of dams, reservoirs, and levees. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers currently operates more than 500 flood control devices nationwide.
Over the years, as development has increased, you begin to have more damage regardless of how much protection you have provided.
Today, over 1/3 of the population lives in flood-prone areas. Federal aid has been available for flood victims since the 1950s, but the magnitude of recent floods has put a strain on those funds. Long-term prevention efforts are now being stressed instead of short-term payouts. After the '93 Midwest flood, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, used government funds to purchase property from people whose homes were claimed by the floodwaters. Over 8,000 properties, in some instances entire communities, were bought out. Flooding in the spring of 1995 proved this effort to be very cost-effective. The National Flood Insurance Program is another FEMA mitigation effort. Under the NFIP, people in participating communities can buy flood insurance not available on the common market.
What we try to do through our programs is convince people not to live at the water's edge, but to build back out of harm's way as much as possible.
Still, some people choose to live with the risks.
The only thing we can do is say, okay, if you're going to take this risk, then you're not going to get any assistance from the federal government. You're on your own. And that's really the only way we can stop a lot of this unwise development.
Vivian Brown, The Weather Channel.